Well, kids, there you go. A very, very simple and economical repair on a pretty expensive pump. Hey, what's up, kids? Welcome back to Speedy's Garage. If you missed part one to see how we got here, I'll put a link right up at the top so you can go back and see how we disassembled this water meth injection pump. In this video, we're going to reassemble it, so let's get right to the action. Well, it's been a couple of days. I was a little worried this bearing would be hard to find, but actually it was super easy. And they were very reasonably priced, like $3. So, ordered some. Now the $1 million question is, can I put it back together and it work? So all three of these were like $9. I'll leave a link in the description where you can get them. There's the original. You see it's all jacked up. There's the new one, nice and clean. Looking at these, both sides are the same, so it's not going to matter which direction it goes back in. We're going to start by putting it back in the pump head, I guess we'll call it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put this, I could put the sleeve in after, but because this housing's aluminum, I'm actually going to put the sleeve back in the bearing first. So I'll take this back out. I'm gonna put that sleeve in first. That's the first thing. So there's what it looks like when it's back in place, nice and flush. Everything spins nice and free. And I don't know if this little machined spacer or sleeve was convex a little bit or whatever, but it felt like it kind of popped into place. So it was kind of tight and then boop, it just kind of popped down in there. And now we're going to put the bearing back in the housing. Again, I don't think it matters which way it goes. They both look exactly the same. And when you put, or both sides look exactly the same. And when you put a bearing back in, actually look at that. It's almost in there. It's best to use the old bearing as kind of a protector. You don't want to bang on the inside area and dent that because there's little rollers in there. You want to make sure that stays nice and free spinning. So I'm going to use the old bearing kind of as a support and then a large socket to tap that the rest of the way down. And it should protect the new bearing. And you can usually tell when they're seated because the sound of the tap will change. I'm looking at the back to make sure it's flush against the housing. And it looks like it is. I'll double check, make sure it still spins nice and free. And it does. So that's that part of the job done. Now we got to reassemble the pump. We're going to start that assembly process by putting this housing back on. I don't know what this thing is called. Leave me a comment below. I didn't look this up. Tell me what this thing is called. I'm going to call it the coil for now. And you might be tempted to try to tap it in from this way, and that might work, but I'm afraid it will push the bearing out. I don't want to risk that. So I'm going to have to tap this down on top of the coil shaft. This is probably going to be a little tedious to get it started. And you have to be careful. Remember, don't hit the bearing. There's a sleeve here and a sleeve back here and then the sleeve in the middle. You can tap on those areas, but that middle part, you want to keep that nice and pristine to protect the bearing. Well, the doggone sleeve moved anyway. You can see how it pushed down. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that thing's machined kind of convex. So it has like a sweet spot where it wants to be in place, and I went past it somehow. So now we're just going to have to tap, or try to tap this bearing down back over top of it. I'm going to use a 14 millimeter. Okay, good. We didn't hurt the bearing. It's still nice and smooth. And remember, there's a flat machined into that shaft, and that's what that sleeve sets on. Once that flat part levels off, That's how far down it will go. Everything looks good so far. Now we need to put this, I'm going to call it an impeller. I'm probably calling all this the wrong name, but you know what I mean. And this has a flat in it, and it lines up with the flat on the shaft. And then we're just going to tap that down. I don't like that. It's 10 millimeters too big. I need something smaller. There we go. In this area where the little copper drags on the electrical pieces here, doesn't have much wear on it, but I'm going to go ahead and use just a Scotch-Brite, a red scuff pad, and clean that up since I've got it apart. The housing has some key marks in it. There's 180 degree apart at the top, and there's two side by side at the bottom, so you need to pay attention to that. The bottom, you can see the two keyways here, and on the top there's just one, which means you can turn how it's mounted 180 degrees, and that matters because there's an inlet and an outlet on the pump head, and there's mounting screws in the back. So I want to make sure I put this back together the way it was originally, and on Project Sport Runner we mounted upside down with the inlet on the left, so I know that it needs to be mounted like that. So that means the two screws need to be facing to the back. So I need to put this in. I'm going to do a little test fit here. Put the top on. And put the cap on. If I flip it upside down, the inlet should be over here, and it is. So this is how I want it to go together. So that I don't forget, I'm going to use a silver Sharpie and mark everything. So I'm going to take it back apart. I'm going to assemble the pump head. Make sure this is still seated, and it is. There's a gasket that goes on the pump head. Mine's still good, so I'm going to reuse it. But if yours is not, you can put some RTV around this to seal it up. And put that gasket back on there. Make sure it's where it's supposed to be. I'm going to put the cap on. I'm going to line those marks up so I know it's right. Whoops. Right here. Double check the gasket, it looks good. Now I'm going to put the cap on. Actually first, almost forgot the valves. So I got to put the valves back in. These are a little tricky to work with because they are hard to get in there. Come on. You just have to push them and they'll go. If they give you trouble, you can put a little water or maybe a little drop of alcohol on them, but mine went back in, not too bad. Now we want the cap to go on there. Make sure that's seated good, and then finally, actually, I think that has to be facing this way. So that's how it goes. Two screws at the top. And there's that. Now we can put some screws in it. Start with a couple of long ones. So I double checked the gasket. It looks good. I'm going to put the rest of the screws in the pump head, and then we can reassemble the housing. And since this thing did leak originally, that's what happened to that bearing, I'm going to use some high temp black RTV and seal up the housing. This was not on here as new, so I'm adding this material in hopes that we can seal the thing up. There we go. And I'm going to add the same RTV to the top or the bottom, actually. In my case, it'll be the top, so mount it upside down. And this is probably going to be a little fiddly too, because I've got to somehow get these to retract to go over top of the bearing there and then get down onto the coil and line up the two notches. Using a long screwdriver worked. You just have to hold your mouth right, my grandfather used to always say. I'll put a little RTV on the screw holes. Messy stuff. These longer screws are just a little bit tricky because the magnet wants to grab them and keep them from going into the top. So you have to kind of fiddle with it a minute, but you'll eventually get it. And I guess the last thing we need to know is if it works. So I've got the power probe back out. Obviously got a little bit of water. Let's see what happens. There we go. Looks like it's working to me. The last thing I'm going to do is put a little bit more RTV around this opening for the wiring. Then I'm going to set this thing up and let it dry. I don't know that any water can get in right there, but better safe than sorry since we've had a couple of problems. Well, kids, there you go. A very, very simple and economical repair on a pretty expensive pump. So I've learned that these are obviously not waterproof or weather resistant. I thought they were since they were made for water meth injection that was meant to go on an automobile. But in my research, these are really just aquarium pumps or similar, very, very close, and they're not sealed up. So I had this one as a spare I had one as a spare on the shelf, brand new. I sealed it up with the RTV, and I actually went online and found a rubber boot to go over it as well. It covers the entire pump, and I put a little zip tie around it to further protect it. I did all that before I put it back on Project Sport Runner. Since I had this, thought I'd go ahead and take it apart, see if I could fix it, and I did. So now I'll put this one back on the shelf as a spare in case I ever have trouble with the one that's currently back on Project Sport Runner. Hopefully, since I sealed it up, it'll last a lot longer than these had been, which were only lasting about a year like I mentioned. They're very easy to work on, so if you have water meth injection on your car and you're starting to have trouble with the pump, you saw how easy it is to take it apart. There's only a couple of moving parts and some bearings inside. Ordered the bearings for $9 for 3 of them. Again, there'll be a link in the description to that bearing if you happen to need one. It looked like it was the same all the way through. And a very, very simple repair. I also talked to you guys about why I recommend water meth injection on the little 3.4 liter V6 Toyota engine with a supercharger, also known as a 5VZFE engine, and why I don't recommend it on a Hellcat. I know you guys have seen me running water meth injection on the 4Runner, Project Sport Runner, and I've gotten a lot of questions. Hey, are you going to put water meth injection on your Hellcat? And the answer is no, and it's because the Hellcat is intercooled and the 4Runner is not. That little supercharger with the packaging they had to do, there's no way to cool that air down. Water meth injection goes a long way to cooling that intake charge and giving you a lot more power. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Check us out on Instagram. It's at Speedy's_garage, as well as our website, www.speedysgarage.net. And hopefully, I'll see you out there.